As part of this year's Tolpuddle Martyrs Festival, we are joining the Dorset Stand Up to Racism protest outside Charborough House, the home of the local Conservative MP, Richard Drax, the largest landowner in Dorset. In 1834, when early British trade unions were fighting to free the Tolpuddle Martyrs from transportation, African slaves across the Caribbean were fighting to free themselves from the horrors of slavery. The slave trade was outlawed by Britain in 1807, but slavery itself continued on the plantations such as those owned by the Drax estates until the 1830s. It was only after uprisings, strikes and rebellions by slaves themselves, at great cost, was the trade ended. And even then, it was the slavers who were compensated. This protest is in support of the Caribbean Reparations Campaign, who have called on Richard Drax to bequeath Drax Hall and his plantations to the people of Barbados. We will hear from speakers and campaigners both at the protest, around Britain and from Barbados.
The CARICOM Reparation Commission says it is time to repair the harm and suffering that have resulted from crimes committed against enslaved and endangered peoples. This, they say, is a time for moral leadership. This is the moment of reparatory justice. Yeah! Now, Professor Hilary Beckles is a very eminent historian of the Caribbean. He's chair of the Reparations Commission. He points out that the Drax family and the Drax Hall estate have very special significance over the centuries. Hilary Beckles says, Black lives mattered only to make millionaires of English enslavers. And he says, the Drax family did it longer than any other elite family. He says, the Drax family has done more harm and violence to the Black people of Barbados than any other family. The Draxes built and designed and structured slavery. If you would like to learn more about that, there's a wonderful video on the Stand Up to Racism Dorset Facebook page when Hilary Beckles spoke to us some months ago. It's really, really worth a viewing. Well, as our friend Nigel Costley here from the Southwest TUC has pointed out, in fact, no one can be held responsible for the action of their ancestors. But Richard Drax, as Nigel said, is still sitting on a mountain of gold gained from the horrors of slavery, and it's time he paid some back. Well, Stand Up to Racism Dorset has written several times to Richard Drax, politely, asking him to discuss the request from Barbados. He hasn't responded. We've asked to meet him today, but I'm not optimistic today that we're going to cite him.
Here he is. I'm here on behalf of and I just on behalf of Sir Richard, I just want to tell you one thing. As Malcolm X so wisely put it, you can't have capitalism without racism. And indeed, I couldn't agree more with Angela Davis, who says racism cannot be separated from capitalism. So my case rests.
Here, and I'm happy to be here with you this morning to join you with this very important protest We in Barbados stand fully in solidarity with this protest action, and we really appreciate the level of work that our brothers and sisters in Britain are doing so as to make the call on Richard Drax for reparation for our Barbadian people. We in Barbados are very happy to join this protest action. We respect what you're doing for us. We see this as very important for our struggles in Barbados. Richard Drax must pay reparation to the people of Barbados. And it is very good for us to have this kind of solidarity action next to his residence so that he will understand that it's not only the people of Barbados that are pushing for reparation for our people from Richard Drax, but also the people of the United Kingdom. My brothers and sisters, we are very pleased and happy to know that this can happen. We are also prepared to organize similar action in Barbados so that we can express our feeling, okay, so that we can make our demands on Richard Drax so that he will understand that he must pay a reparation to the people of Barbados for the crime against humanity and for the crime against our people. So on behalf of the Caribbean Movement for Peace and Integration, I want to wish you a very good solidarity action, that you are our brothers and sisters in the fight and in the struggle, and we will be happy one day to meet you right here in Barbados. All the best. Thank you.
It's fantastic to be joining you virtually. I'm sorry not to be there in person. It's incredibly inspiring to see this protest taking place today. I think that I first learned about the Drax family in around 2004 when I began researching Dorset's slave trading families. Prior to that, I hadn't known anything about this history at all. When I started researching it, there was so much to learn. So many families from Dorset were involved in this terrible trade. I think it's important to remember that whilst many people feel that no one can be responsible for their actions, but they can be held accountable for the action they choose to take today. The past is intrinsically linked to the present, and it's just so connected. Whether that's the murder of an African-American man in the US or footballers getting racially abused online, this is direct legacy of colonialism and slavery, and this comes from the actions of families like Mr. Drax's family. We can put the wrongs of the past right, and I do believe that Mr. Drax needs to do the right thing and give the plantation back to the people of Barbados. I totally stand in solidarity with Barbados from here in Somerset, where I'm based, and just wish everybody all the best with this protest today. And thank you all for coming and taking this really important step for action.
Really delighted to be part of this really important protest. Solidarity to my brothers and sisters in Barbados. It's funny, isn't it, how it's never them. It's always too difficult to do something. It's always too difficult to be held accountable for the actions around slavery. They can choose what to do now, but if they don't choose to do the right thing, then we have to decide what to do next. And frankly, I think that it's full time for these people to understand that we haven't just started asking for reparations. This is something that we've been arguing for and campaigning for some considerable time, and enough is enough. We have to stop the excuses. They have to stop saying that they just can't do anything when the whole world knows that if they choose to do it, that they can. And we have to hold these people accountable. So their choice now is this: do the right thing and do what the people of Barbados are asking for, or we will take the next step And the next step, I believe, is we actually have to start hurting these people in their pockets. If they don't do the right thing, then we have to start boycotting their business interests. And I firmly believe that. I've heard too many excuses now about why they can't do things, and it really has to stop. It's the same thing that we hear all the time about why organisations, why individuals won't do anything about the racism that we as Black people experience in workplaces up and down this country, and actually as people of African descent across the world. We have to start holding people to account. We can't just rely on their goodwill, because frankly, everything that we have been shown shows us that they have no goodwill. They are very happy to sit there on their riches and to watch us struggle. Our people are struggling to survive while they sit there on their riches, which has been gained off the backs of Black people, gained off the backs of people who were enslaved from Africa. I'm a proud, my heritage is proud Tika people from the Cameroon who were enslaved and taken to Jamaica and had to endure the worst conditions, had to endure slavery and received nothing in return except abuse, nothing in return except continued racism to this day. So enough is enough. Do the right thing, or we go on to the next step. We will escalate our campaign for reparations and make sure that you are forced to do the right thing if you don't choose to do the right thing. Thank you so much for listening, and solidarity to you all.
Thank you so much for inviting me to join you for this year's Toll Puddle Festival, and specifically for this rally for slavery justice in solidarity with Barbados as they seek reparatory justice from the Drax estate for African heritage communities. For us here in Bristol and the vast majority of Bristolians, and indeed the world, Bristol's relationship with slavery was largely unknown. It took the toppling of that statue of Edward Colston after many years of protests and petitions that the horror story of this peddler of human misery and death is now being told. The plaque at the base of the plinth described Colston as a philanthropist and made no mention of the true source of his wealth, slavery and slave-produced sugar. For not only was he a member of the Royal African Company, which held the monopoly on the English trade in enslaved Africa, he was also its deputy governor. And following his death, he was not only literally put on a pedestal to be immortalized by a privileged few, but he was commemorated in a number of landmarks and schools across the city. With growing awareness of his involvement in Britain's slave trade by campaigners in the city, they stepped up their protests and petitions for name changes, which culminated in that fated and historic day in June 2020. When that statue was toppled and pushed into Bristol Harbour following peaceful protests in support of Black Lives Matter and the murder of George Floyd, it was a symbolic demonstration of our city's complex relationship with race. It highlighted the long shadows cast by slavery and racism in Bristol and how this has shaped our city's discourse about inequality and exclusion amid modern concerns about institutional racial violence and the disproportionate effect of the coronavirus on our Black and brown citizens. We all recognize that solving entrenched racism and inequality is a collective responsibility. No single organization or individual can tackle this problem alone. In this, Bristol is by no means unique, but by sharing our experiences, other cities across the world may find some inspiration and practical ideas for how our political leadership has helped to shape a city's response to racism and disparity. In the aftermath of the toppling of Edward Colston's statue, our city saw escalating threats directed particularly towards Bristol's Black communities. We've seen increases in hate crime within Bristol, including racially aggravated assaults and the desecration of the grave of Scipio Africanus, a young 18-year-old enslaved young African buried in 1720. That is why it was really important for our Mayor, Marvin Rees, and myself to set out a process to manage our journey as a city. We've established the History Commission, which will help us to tell our full city history. As we learn this fuller history, including the part played not only by Black people, but by women, the working class, trade unions, and children, among others, we will be in a better position to bring the whole city with us as we understand who we are, how we got here, and who we wish to honour. On the 2nd of March this year, the council voted to back a joint Labour and Green motion regarding reparations atonement for Bristol's role in the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. The motion calls for the government to set up an all-party parliamentary commission of inquiry to look at how reparations might be delivered, and also resolve to implement community wealth creation strategies to produce more sustainable and equitable growth, whilst alleviating systemic poverty and acknowledging a just economy is the only way to achieve racial justice. It also marked the start of dialogue between African heritage communities, civic institutions, and indeed the citizens of Bristol to look at holistic reconciliation and reparatory justice for Bristol's role in the transatlantic trafficking of enslaved Africans. Reparatory justice should be driven by the experiences and perspectives of African heritage communities. Nothing about us without us. It's great to be joined by Trevor Prescott, Barbados Labour Cabinet Minister, and a big shout out to Sir Hilary Beckles and the CARICOM Reparations Commission, who are pushing for reparatory justice for the historical crimes of native genocide and African enslavement in the Caribbean region. And Bristol stands alongside Barbados. The Drax family created the first slaved worked plantation in the British Empire. Their hands are steeped in the blood of our ancestors, so I fully support the call for the Drax Hall estate in Barbados to be donated to the people of Barbados, whose ancestors lie in what can only be described as killing fields. Bristol's involvement in the slave trade and the great wealth acquired from it has come to light and brought with it some very uncomfortable questions about how we deal with this city and indeed the country's past. The legacy of this horrific trade cannot be pinned to an individual, to one individual, as we have done in Bristol, with Colston acting as a cover for the families of Elton, Costa, Fars, Wills, Winterstoke, Tyndall, La Roche, and many others who have sailed under the radar whilst Colston has borne the brunt of this city's iron. The fact is that these Bristol families were responsible for shipping over 500,000 enslaved Africans across the Atlantic, making up a fifth of the total of enslaved Africans carried on British ships. Like the Drax family, Bristol's plantation owners and merchants who invested in plantations in Barbados, Jamaica, and across the Caribbean received over £500,000 in compensation for the loss of their enslaved property when the Emancipation Act was passed, freeing the enslaved in 1834. Today, that compensation paid by you and me, the taxpayer, is now worth around £2.36 billion. My ancestors who were slaves received nothing. That can't be right. Many of our international, national, and civic institutions were founded upon discrimination and funded by the proceeds of slavery. Facts that no longer can be ignored and are now finally being acknowledged by a growing number of Bristol and UK institutions. Systemic racism is deeply entrenched in our society, and the motion that we brought in Bristol was a landmark step to helping us look at the roots of racial discrimination and add to our efforts to address it. The trade in human cargo is undoubtedly the biggest stain on Britain's checkered past, and the sins of Bristol's past lives on today. Poor educational outcomes, growing health inequalities, overrepresentation in the criminal justice system, wealth, power, and influence eluding us at every turn. The transportation of the toll puddle martyrs to the penal colonies bears some similarities to that of my ancestors. They were fettered with heavy chains. They were fettered in heavy irons, riveted to their legs. They were transported to the colonies of Australia. Disease was rampant. Epidemics swept through the masses, resulting in a tragic number of deaths, but do pale into insignificance when you consider over 2 million enslaved Africans were transported across the Atlantic. The protests of the Workers' Union led to the freedom of the toll puddle martyrs 3 years after they were sentenced. Unlike my ancestors, who were denied any rights, being treated less than human beings. So as we celebrate the toll puddle martyrs, let's not forget the millions of other martyrs, the enslaved and today's descendants who continue to fight for their freedom and emancipation, whilst the yoke of colonialism hangs ominously around our necks. So in the same way, we have come together to seek justice and freedom for the toll puddle martyrs and for our ancestors and our brothers and sisters in Barbados. I ask for your solidarity, support, and your allyship by standing with African heritage communities in our quest for reparatory justice. Black Lives Matter too. Thank you.
Thank you, Asha. That was brilliant. And everything that you said is utterly correct and so right. And thank you for joining us today as we try to seek reparative justice for the injustice of slavery that happened, and the fact that there is still somebody making money off of that, which is why we are here today. And thank you for joining us on a Saturday from Bristol. It's always a pleasure to have you. And hopefully next year we can have you at the festival proper.
No justice! No peace! 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 Black Lives Matter! No! Black Lives Matter! No! Black Lives Matter! No! Black Lives Matter! No!
As you can hear me, we're marching along Drax's very long wall that surrounds this Dorset estate.
No justice! No peace! What do we want? When do we want it? No! What do we want? No! When do we want it? No! Black Lives Matter!
We've arrived at the one of many gates that is into the huge Drax estate. He doesn't appear to be here to meet us, but I'm sure he's getting the message that it is time for justice, and it's time for him to deal with the people of Barbados and hand over his plantations.
Because Dunsany Castle is also the property of the extended Drax family, the Plunkett clan of the Drax family. You may know that our own Richard Drax is a Plunkett. Dunsany estate in Ireland was once also a part owner of Drax Hall estate in Barbados. And the message we've just got through with a wonderful photo from Ireland, from the United Against Racism movement, is solidarity with Barbados, solidarity with Dorset. They stand with us and ready to join us in our future struggle for slavery justice. Thank you.
But I just say, here we are looking at this map, protected by the police. There are 280,000 homeless people in Britain. 280,000. It's a national disgrace that one person can have so much and then so many people can have so little. And in the UK. And it's on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you. Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame on you! Shame When you have a lens for the scope of how racism works within the United Kingdom, you are able to see it everywhere you look and just how deeply entrenched it is. I read an essay titled The Silences and Disclosures of Slavery Heritage in the United Kingdom, written by a man called A.V. Seaton. And what we are not taught in our history classes is Britain's direct involvement within the transatlantic slave trade. And as a result, the remnants of what systemic racism has manifested to in the 21st century.
And we want to send a message to Richard Drax now that there will be no turning back. There will be no turning back. So if he has no conscience, we will make sure that it comes to the reality to know that the benefits which he has gained over the centuries derive from the greatest crime against humanity. And it is not vague poetry. It's a serious comment. The CARICOM body, which is comprised of 12 nations in the Caribbean, has agreed that this is a crime against humanity. And our liberation will not be fully achieved until we get an apology and reparation from Mr. Drax. I can't believe that in a civil society, we can have a man serving in the highest court of the land, a major MP in Britain, sitting in the House of Commons, and he has no conscience. He cannot even say, I'm sorry for the crime that was committed against humanity, the manner in which Black people were treated by the British since the 17th century, the first half of the 17th century. You have had, he's enjoying at present an accumulation of wealth that started from in the 1640s. We were in the British hands right up to 1966. We were struggling to survive. Up to 1834, when they gave us cosmetic emancipation with not one university. We had not one university in the Caribbean. We didn't have universal secondary education. Or people was living in abject poverty with dry pits, living in chattel houses. They were paying us up to 1937, 2 shillings and 6 pence for labor. And in the early days, they paid nothing. And it was the labor of Black men and women in this country in the 17th century that caused Mr. Drax to be what he is today in the House of Assembly. He was able to give, they were able to give their children university education out of the wealth from Barbados and Jamaica. When Black children could not even get an opportunity to go to primary school, they then talk about education to meet the basic needs of labor, continuing to suppress the creativity. Mr. Drax's family were there contributing to the literature, the sociological studies of the day written by the Drax family and the Lascelles about our inferiority, about how plantations should be run in the Caribbean. Barbados was the model of slavery in the Western world, chattel slavery. Wherever we had slavery in the Western world, Barbados was the model, not designed by us, but designed by the Drax family. They were the first major plantation owners in the Caribbean, and the biggest. Started off with over 600 acres of land, still own that land. From generation to generation, still owning that land. Still paying starvation wages at Drax Hall. And exploiting labor in Barbados. How can a man as intelligent as he purports to be not understand the pain that our people are experiencing in the Caribbean? Can he understand what the psychological damage that was done to our people? Can he understand that? When you say that a people are not equivalent to human beings or to you, is that not supremacy? Is that not a doctrine of white supremacy? And in this march, I see people that look just like him, but they have a conscience. They know that we are all human beings. At least if he can say, I'm sorry, or even meet you at the gate. This special gate, which he has. We can say, well, this is a man that is showing some form and is willing to receive some form of redemption. But it seems to me, the fact that he is comfortable with millions of pounds, he wants to find a justification for why he is as wealthy as he is without accepting the fact that he's a beneficiary of the greatest crime against humanity. He has a moral duty. He has a moral duty and a moral responsibility to his own people and to our people in the region. And today he does not even see it fit and proper to come to the gate and to speak to his people who made him also what he is, because he must pay the people of Barbados for the wrong that his family has committed. I am not going to support the view that he has no duty to compensate for that wrong. It's more than just moral. You know how many lives, I mean, not only Barbados, but you know how many lives his family destroyed? Do you know that his family also invested in the ships that transport Africans from the West Coast to Barbados and Jamaica? They invested in large partnerships with the enslavement of Black people off the African coast. They participated in the discussion for the abolition of slavery. And with persons not stripping that facade, you'll get the impression that there was an act of human consciousness. But it was a selfish act again, because they were producing enough passive Creole slaves that they then continue to dominate the trade across the region by reproducing, forcing women to reproduce children, and took the children from their parents and shipped them across the region. He did not only export sugar, he exported human beings. He imported and exported human beings across the region. I am so pleased with you this morning because you have been able to do, and rather you've been able to continue the struggle. It is not only resistance, but we must counter these acts. And I'm hoping that this is just the beginning of things to happen there in Dorset.
Hi everybody, I've just been bringing solidarity from the TUC to everybody here in Dorset, protesting outside the Drax estate peacefully and safely, but also to bring our solidarity to our sisters and brothers in Barbados. You know, because this is about reparations and justice, and those who profited from the terrible crime of slavery and the slave trade. And you know, I know some have said that you must not visit the sins of the father on the children, and certainly Richard Drax has got his own sins to account for in the way that he's voted in the House of Commons, including on Labour's proposal for a duty on landlords to make sure that the homes they rent are fit for human habitation. So he's got to account for that. But we can't just wash over this history, because the legacy of slavery is racism. Racism was invented to rationalise why it was that white people could make fortunes on the back of treating black people as less than human. And we still live with that legacy today. Just look at what's happening in the jobs market. Who gets a job? Who's first out? Who's on low pay? Who's on 0 hours? And critically, our wonderful heroes, our COVID key workers, on the front line, risking their health and sometimes lives for the rest of us. So racism is still here, and we know the impact it has today. And that's why here, outside the Drax estate, we think it's time to pay up and pay back. Thank you.
It's refreshing to read a message from Diane Abbott, a woman of colour, who's been an inspiration to me and to all of us for how she's struggled against so many barriers. And her words are good, powerful, potent words. She says, "I'm very sorry I cannot be with you here today. Your struggle is an important one. Our joint struggle is an important one. This country has a terrible history of slavery and slave trading. Not only is it a terrible history, it is also a terrible present too, because we are all products of that history. Many of us are part of that history as the victims of slavery, but there are also institutions in this country that are part of the history of the perpetrators. Some of the great wealth of this country was built on slavery, and there are still individuals with great wealth built out of slavery and grand houses too. And there's Drax in his high-ceilinged rooms just behind us with his elegant statues. All of this matters because the ideas that allow slavery are still present, Diane says. Because if you're going to invade countries, enslave people, transport them, treat them worse than animals and work them to death, then you first of all have to regard them as something less than human. This is where racism comes from. We're still fighting that battle, as you see right up today. This is important, and I offer my support. We will not give up the fight.
A contribution from Cleo Lake, who is from Bristol, and she is a reparations activist.
I would like to tell you that I am the former Lord Mayor of Bristol. I was a Green Party councillor for 5 years, just completing my 5-year term. As Lord Mayor of Bristol, I removed 2 portraits of enslavers that were still hanging on the wall in City Hall in 2018 then, 2018, 2019, still there, still revered in a diverse, multicultural, forward-thinking city like Bristol. What a disgrace, but what a relief now that those portraits are gone and the message and the signals were given.
Well done.
As I've said, I am of Jamaican and African descent, on a journey to reclaim my culture and my identity, those things that alongside my ancestors' lives were stolen.
Absolutely.
Within that would be my indigenous spiritual beliefs that I have no real connection to, I wasn't brought up with, because they were stolen by the likes of people like the Drax family and also the Church of England. Yeah. So when the Church of England today does their matrix on contested history, and I welcome that, and again, Dorset making moves by removing that plaque that was in one of your churches, good move, good action, well done. As the Church of England reckons with this and maybe mutters about reparations, do they understand that reparations is beyond compensation? It's not just a payout. Money alone cannot repair the damage. It's more than that. We could all walk away today, those of us of African descent, with money in our pocket, which would be a benefit, which would mean we might have intergenerational wealth, which would dig a lot of us out of poverty here in the Caribbean and back home on the continent. It's not about leaving Africa out of the picture, but it will not repair all the damage. It will not repair racism, will it? Money alone will not repair racism. So when we talk about reparations, it's about a holistic approach and a holistic journey in terms of learning as well. And as one of the former speakers said, we resisted then and we will resist now. And we can even stand here today because of the journey that other activists have made over decades, over centuries, resisting from day one. And I think it's important we try to learn and catch up with the movements that are happening. And I'd like to shout out the campaign group Stop the Maangamizi. Maangamizi, a Kiswahili term, as we try and reclaim our language, which equates to basically the African Holocaust. Enslavement was nothing less than a genocide. Let's be real. And their campaign, Stop the Maangamizi, we charge ecocide and genocide. Those two things hand in hand. So as we march for the climate movement, we also march for this history. Because without enslavement, you wouldn't have had the ravaging of our Mother Earth. And it's about time. It's about time.
Thank you, Cleo, for coming today.
As I was passing Charlborough House, I met a man who'd stopped to stare. I asked the stranger as we stood, what kind of folk live there? That kind of folk live there, said he. Build the wall and now you might own all the land that you can see, and half of Dorsetshire besides. Half of Dorsetshire besides. Half of Dorsetshire besides, said I, and all the land that I could see. Pray tell me, sir, what kind of folk have such economy? Have such economy? Such economy, said he. Why, that's the home of Richard Drax, whose family wealth was built upon 30,000 broken backs. 30,000 broken backs. 30,000 broken backs, said I. Right, tell me, what do you mean? Does such a man of wealth and land have hands aren't kept clean? Hands aren't kept clean. Hands that aren't kept clean, said he. His money came from slavery. His hands are as dirty as can be. And here's a little history. That history begins with James. His money came from sugar cane, a pioneer of the slave trade, and Draxhall stands today. Draxhall stands today. Draxhall stands today, said he, and Drax Plantation too, where Brother William took the trade, and their slave numbers grew. Their slave numbers grew. Their slave numbers grew, said he, until then came the day that slavery was banned, said he. But it was John Drax who got paid a fortune. John Drax who got paid. It was John Drax who got paid, said he, and not the former slaves. The owners compensated, no, the wealth of land worked by slaves, he glibly waved away. He glibly waved away. He glibly waves away, said he. He denies his history, says it was hundreds of years ago. Nothing to do with me, says he. Nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with me, said I, when his life's such luxury and owns half of Dorsetshire, decides on the proceeds of slavery. The proceeds of slavery. So as I was passing Charlborough House, I met a man who'd stopped to stare, so I asked the stranger what it was that he was doing there. What are you doing there? What am I doing here, said he? I've come to settle the score. This day there might be just me, but one day there'll be more. One day there'll be more. One day there'll be more, said he, one day, and then we'll see the attitudes of slavers join their statues in the sea. Join their statues in the sea. So as I was passing Charlborough House, I met a man who'd stopped to